You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. Walking from the bus stop to her building, Sarah felt the arrival of spring. The twilight was retreating further and further, wrapping the sky in a light lilac haze at this hour, whereas just 2 weeks ago it had been pitch dark. Her hands were pulled down by heavy shopping bags. Fruit for her daughter, fresh bread, a choice piece of beef from which she could make a rich borscht or an aromatic goulash. And of course, sweets. How could she do without them? Today she had received her long-awaited advance payment. Tomorrow was a day off, which meant that in the evening, she and Alice would have their usual Friday movie night. Her daughter had already chosen some comedy. A faint smile touched her lips. The only son that filled her world with meaning and joy was her daughter, Alice. She was 8 now. She was diligently studying at the nearby school, showing brilliant progress. Although Sarah never sat over textbooks with her, only occasionally guided her with extracurricular assignments. Nothing more. Her heart ached with the desire to spend more time with her, but she had to work tirelessly, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, to provide for the two of them. Alice, to her pride, managed on her own. She was remarkably responsible, quick-witted, sensible, and surprisingly independent. From her first school years, she mastered the science of life alone. She walked to school by herself, because by the time Alice left the house, her mother was already rushing to work on a crowded bus. She returned alone to the silence of an empty apartment after lessons, tidied up, prepared her own lunch, started her homework, and set the alarm on her phone to get ready for classes on time. Alice attended the basketball section at her school. The coach said that the little girl had an unyielding character and great prospects in this sport. A real miracle, not a child. She smiled again, remembering her little one. Yes, she was incredibly lucky with her daughter. And yet, her heart filled with bitterness at the sight of other children surrounded by adult care. Grandparents whose love enveloped them, mothers who devoted themselves to the home, and attentive fathers. These boys and girls had more time for games. They were surrounded by constant care and protection. Adults made their childhood brighter, happier, safer. At first, Sarah was tormented by anxiety about her daughter's fragile figure trudging alone through the streets under the weight of her backpack. Colleagues were surprised. Aren't you afraid some bad person will take her? What if a stray dog attacks? What if she gets lost? Sarah just sighed heavily. These fears, of course, lived within her. There was no escaping them. But in Alice, she was absolutely certain. She wouldn't go with a stranger, she would avoid a pack of dogs, and she would definitely find her way home. She was sensible beyond her years, attentive, sensitive, with a sharp mind. There was no other way for her. She couldn't afford to stay home with her daughter. Changing jobs to one closer to home was also impossible because the brick factory where she worked as an economist paid well. How much effort it had cost her to get that position. Now her income exceeded the city average. Life as a single mother with a daughter wasn't luxurious, but it was enough for the essentials. Clothes, rented accommodation, food, and even small pleasures. If her income decreased, they simply wouldn't make ends meet. And then Eleanor Miller could carry out her long-held plan. The thought of her former mother-in-law made Sarah shiver. A terrible person. And yet, once upon a time, she had seemed sweet, friendly, full of goodwill. When many years ago David brought the girl who was already carrying Alice under her heart to meet his parents, Sarah was trembling with nerves. She understood perfectly well how their situation looked from the outside. A village simpleton, without family or connections, without a penny to her name, had bewitched a boy from a rich family, intoxicated the young man, taken advantage of his inexperience, deliberately got him pregnant. And David was now simply forced to marry her, like an honest and noble man. In reality, things were different. But even her classmates who knew her well voiced similar conjectures. "Wow, you're brilliant," red-haired Chloe sincerely praised, hearing the news. "You seem so modest and proper, but you managed to arrange your life in a way we could only dream of. Now you'll live in abundance, wanting for nothing. A genius plan. I need to take note." "Why not? I want to marry a rich man too. It's a perfectly natural desire." The girls weren't being malicious or gloating. They were genuinely happy for her, who, in their opinion, had pulled off a daring scheme and emerged victorious, receiving a proposal from an enviable groom. Perhaps it was then, listening to her friends, that Sarah realized everyone else thought exactly the same way. And David's parents? Of course, they would see her as an enemy. Naturally, she had come from the sticks to establish herself in the city through a profitable marriage. David did indeed come from a very wealthy family, but Sarah didn't find out about it right away. He dressed simply. Jeans, t-shirts, preferring comfortable sneakers to expensive shoes. Only later did it turn out that his watch and mobile phone cost a considerable amount. An experienced eye would have noticed this immediately. But how could a village girl know the price of such things? A watch was just a watch. A phone was just a phone. Usually, David came to university on a motorcycle. Many came in expensive cars. There, the wealth was obvious. But here, a motorcycle. Sarah, meanwhile, thought a motorcycle wasn't a very expensive thing, accessible to many. And he also worked part-time at a large real estate company, occupying not the highest position, a courier or something similar. So the presence of a motorcycle didn't surprise her. He had probably saved up or taken out a loan. At the beginning of their romance, David didn't mention that the company belonged to his father, and Sarah couldn't even imagine how successful and wealthy his parents were. Sarah had watched David from afar for a long time. They studied in different departments. He was studying in the prestigious Faculty of Finance and Economics. After school, Sarah also dreamed of getting into that faculty, diligently preparing, spending days and nights over textbooks. But she couldn't get in. Sarah, who grew up in poverty, dreamed of escaping destitution. Her parents were wonderful people, kind, understanding, always ready to support. But Sarah didn't want to repeat their fate. They lived in a modest house without plumbing. A bulky wash basin hung on the wall, and that's where they had to wash. The toilet was outside, the bathhouse was in the yard, but it was only heated on weekends. Her parents worked hard, but there was still not enough money. Wasn't that how everyone around lived? Other families lived in the same conditions. There simply weren't enough jobs and salaries were meager. People didn't give up. They survived as best they could. But Sarah didn't want such a lot for herself. Her parents fully supported their daughter's desire to get an education and stay in the city. They tried not to burden her with housework, wanting all her time to be dedicated to studying. Study, daughter, her mother instructed. Study hard, don't be lazy. God willing, you'll make something of yourself. You have a bright head. The teacher says you're smart and have great potential, her father echoed. Sarah was indeed the best in her class. Studying came easily to her. Sarah saw the university entrance exams as a decisive battle for a happy life, and she endured this battle with dignity. She scored high, pleasantly surprising herself. But this score wasn't enough to get a state-funded place in the Faculty of Finance and Economics. She experienced bitter disappointment mixed with bewilderment. How could this be? In her school, she was head and shoulders above her peers. And why had so many people suddenly surpassed her? Only later did she learn about tutors who coached for tests and about the gratitude that prospective students' parents brought to the dean's office. At that time, Sarah blamed herself for insufficient preparation. She was just a couple of points short of being admitted on a state-funded basis. At the same time, she easily qualified for the paid department. Well, you'll study for a year or two on a paid basis, and then someone will be expelled, and you'll transfer to a state-funded place. An unfamiliar senior student comforted her. She couldn't pass by the girl crying by the result board. Many people do that. You were just a little short on points, so you're smart. Such students are valued and promoted. Sarah just shook her head. This girl couldn't understand that even a year's tuition fee was an unbearable burden for her family. A year was lost. She would have to return to the village, prepare again more seriously this time. And there was no guarantee that her dream would come true in a year. But that same accidental rescuer offered another way out. Why do you need this finance and economics faculty? She shrugged. It's mostly children of the rich and those with connections. The education, in essence, is the same in the Faculty of Enterprise Economics. It's even better, less pompous. How grateful Sarah was to the accidental rescuer. Later, she tried to find her to thank her, but couldn't. It turned out that her points were more than enough for the other faculty, so she did become a student after all. As a student from the village, she was provided with a dormitory and a social scholarship. She couldn't believe her luck for a long time. She studied diligently, attended all lectures, submitted term papers on time, and always did her homework. The teachers praised her, held her up as an example. Sarah even felt a little awkward about it. She gave all her energy to studying. However, she had to work part-time in the evenings for 2 or 3 hours as a salesperson in a bakery near the dormitory. The scholarship wasn't enough to live on. Her parents, despite their best efforts, couldn't help. So she managed as best she could. There was absolutely no time left for clubs, discos, student parties. Sometimes she felt sad, but each time she reminded herself of her goal, and everything fell into place. Her classmates enthusiastically talked about their weekends, shared romantic stories, and vividly described their admirers. The girl also dreamed of a worthy young man by her side, loving, caring, cheerful, and of course, handsome. Someone she could fall madly in love with. But the guys who came into her field of vision didn't live up to the image of a prince. Many were handsome and cheerful, but they seemed too carefree, frivolous, selfish to her. She couldn't tie her fate to any of them. Her friends jokingly called her a bore, and when she refused to go to another party, they threatened her with lonely old age surrounded by a dozen cats. And then, in her 4th year, she finally saw a guy who made her heart beat faster. How could she not have noticed him before? Strange? The young man expertly swooped into the parking lot on a black motorcycle. He was dressed in jeans and a black t-shirt, a helmet on his head. What was it about David that attracted her then? The skill with which he handled the iron horse, his special, graceful posture. At that moment, he reminded her of a prince riding out on a noble steed. Anyway, Sarah, who was rushing to the library, froze and watched from a distance as the motorcyclist dismounted and took off his helmet. For some reason, she really wanted to see his eyes. She shouldn't have, because when David, as if sensing her gaze, turned towards her, she knew she was lost. Piercing turquoise eyes on a tanned face, a dazzling smile, thick hair of an incredible wheat shade. Sarah could have looked at him forever if it weren't for her sense of propriety. She suddenly felt awkward, standing there, staring at a stranger. What would he think of her? She turned sharply and hurried toward the building where the library was located. The guy caught up with her, almost at the entrance. He gently held her arm. She turned around and blushed, meeting his slightly mocking gaze. The stranger smiled warmly, openly, sincerely. Sarah had never felt anything like it. It was hard to describe in words. Goosebumps ran down her back and neck. Warmth spread through her body. Her heart pounded like crazy. That day, Sarah and David's romance began. At first beautiful, like a fairy tale, but it ended like a bad thriller. David confessed that he had felt her gaze and understood from her eyes that it was with her that he could be happy. Only later, analyzing what had happened, Sarah realized by that time the guy was simply sated with beautiful girls from rich families. They were all spoiled, selfish princesses whom nothing could surprise or delight. And here was a simple, unsophisticated girl from the village, moreover, very pretty. Sarah looked at David with loving eyes, hung on his every word, admired everything he did or said. She was happy about trifles, like a simple bouquet of roses, and was amazed by the luxury of restaurants. David found it interesting to observe the reaction of an unspoiled girl. He was the one who opened up a completely new world to the poor student. This made him feel dizzy, instilled a sense of his own power and uniqueness, flattered his ego. Of course, David also developed some feelings for the girl for whom he had become everything. It couldn't have been otherwise. But he never intended to make Sarah the center of his universe. However, Sarah only realized all this later, when difficulties began. At first, it seemed to her that David was performing feat after feat for her sake. He wasn't stingy. He spent money on her. Sarah felt awkward. At first, she even tried to refuse. If anyone knew the value of money, it was Sarah. David worked as a courier. He earned money, but that didn't mean he had to spend it all on her. He just smiled at her objections and gave her another generous gift. Their relationship resembled sometimes a romantic comedy, sometimes a beautiful melodrama. David was sweet, considerate, courted her incredibly beautifully, and always knew how to cheer her up. Sarah still devoted a lot of time to studying, but now lectures and seminars didn't fill her entire life. Amazingly, she had enough time for everything: dates with David and her studies. It was a wonderful, unforgettable time. They had been dating for about a year when the girl realized with horror that she was expecting a child. At first, Sarah couldn't believe it had happened. They had been so careful. But test after test stubbornly showed two bright lines. She had to accept this fact. She fell into despair. Her thesis was due. State exams were coming. The final stretch. She had worked toward this for so long. Perhaps the pregnancy itself wouldn't prevent her from preparing for the final test. She would write her thesis and pass the exams. But by the end of her 5th year, she would have a huge belly. Who would hire her in such a condition? She would have to stay home and take care of the child. And what had those 5 years of study been for then? Would David be happy about this news? Would he take responsibility for her and the child? Their relationship seemed elevated, trusting. But a beautiful romance was one thing, and a burden in the form of a pregnant Sarah was another. She cried for about an hour out of despair, resentment, and fear for the future. Then she calmed down and decided to tell everything to the person on whom her fate depended. David received the news of the pregnancy with unexpected joy. For him, it was still a game. Wow, we're going to be parents. His eyes lit up. A smile appeared. We're going to have our own little one. Cool. He was happy about the child, like a new toy. But Sarah didn't notice it then. She was happy that her beloved didn't see the pregnancy as a problem. So now what? The girl asked, looking at him hopefully. Of course, we'll get married. He smiled, putting his arm around her shoulders. We'll get married, finish studying, then I'll go to work, and you'll be on maternity leave. And where will we live? This question worried Sarah very much. She would soon be asked to leave the dormitory. Would she have to move in with David? Living with relatives was probably difficult. She would have to get used to it. Adjust. We'll live in my apartment, David shrugged. My father gave it to me a long time ago. It's big, spacious, you'll like it. I would have moved out a long time ago. But mother, she said I could only move out when I got married. That was her condition. And now I'm getting married. You have an apartment? Sarah couldn't believe it. Who are your parents? She knew little about his family. He preferred to change the subject whenever she brought it up. Well, what is there to tell about them? David grimaced. Folks are folks. Mother is a housewife. She spent her whole life taking care of me and my brothers, driving us to clubs, all that stuff. There are 3 of us. Remember I told you? Sarah nodded. David had mentioned that he had 2 older brothers. Well, there you go, he continued. Mother takes care of the house. Father runs a business. He has a real estate agency. Didn't I tell you? No. Sarah shook her head. David had never said that the firm where he worked as a courier was owned by his father. Well, now I am. So don't worry, we have a place to live. I need to introduce you to my parents. Mother will be happy now. She thinks I have my head in the clouds, always holding up my older brothers as examples, saying they're serious, unlike me. Now she'll find out that I'm responsible too. Sarah was very afraid of meeting his parents. David was sure that his fiancée would be liked by both his father and mother. Sarah herself had serious doubts. Of course, no one would believe that she hadn't guessed about his wealth. Even her friends thought she had deliberately gotten pregnant by a rich kid. What could she say about his relatives? But the meeting went more than successfully. Although Sarah was initially flustered by the luxurious interiors of the mansion where David lived with his parents. A table was set in the living room. Everything looked appetizing. But from excitement, she couldn't swallow a bite. David's parents introduced themselves. Eleanor Miller, her future mother-in-law, smiled openly. She had the same piercing turquoise eyes as her son. Sarah was amazed at how David's mother looked. This woman was much older than her own mother, but there were no wrinkles on Eleanor Miller's face. Slim, toned, with flawless skin, in a stylish, elegant dress. The groom's father also didn't look his age. Fit, energetic. In conversation, David's parents, despite their wealth, turned out to be pleasant and simple people. Learning Sarah's story, Eleanor Miller was delighted. "What a smart girl you are," she praised. "You've achieved so much through your own hard work. Amazing determination." "I need people like you," Arthur Miller chimed in. "I'll take you on after your maternity leave. Don't worry about the job." Sarah couldn't believe her luck. Everything seemed like a beautiful fairy tale. David's parents showed no dissatisfaction with a poor, pregnant daughter-in-law. On the contrary, they were genuinely happy. "Our rascal needs exactly this kind of girl." Eleanor Miller shook her head, smiling at Sarah. "Responsible, serious, hardworking. What a blessing that you met." Sarah didn't understand then why his parents called David a rascal. He seemed like a perfectly serious and conscious young man. Of course, he sometimes rode his motorcycle recklessly, and he spent a lot of time with friends. But David was still very young and carefree. It was natural that he wanted to have fun. When else, if not in youth? David's parents threw a lavish wedding for the young couple. Sarah was embarrassed that they covered all the expenses. Her parents also felt awkward. But Eleanor Miller behaved simply, naturally, so the tension evaporated. She spoke to Sarah's parents kindly, respectfully, thanking them for raising such a wonderful daughter. She smiled warmly at her daughter-in-law, showering her with compliments. Sarah, in the dress that her mother-in-law had helped choose and paid for, looked like a real princess. In such an outfit, the bride also behaved accordingly. David was proud that his young wife was a beauty. For the first half of the wedding, he didn't let go of her hand. But then, when the official part was over, he, as always, ran off to his friends. Sarah was happy for her husband then. She liked that he was so sociable and cheerful. Family life at first also resembled a fairy tale. Sarah now lived in a huge, stylishly furnished apartment. Before, she had only seen such interiors in magazines. It took her a long time to get used to being the mistress of all this splendor. She had her own card, onto which a substantial sum magically appeared twice a month. This was David transferring money for household expenses. Used to saving on everything, she initially couldn't even spend this money. It was wonderful, unusual, to go to the store and put everything she liked into the basket, instead of searching for discounted products. Her relationship with David's parents was excellent. She considered them family. Eleanor Miller often invited her daughter-in-law over, and they talked for a long time. Sarah talked about herself, her mother-in-law about her life. It turned out that Eleanor Miller had also grown up in a village. Then her family moved to the city, where the young girl met Arthur, her future husband and father of 3 sons. He was just a simple accountant at the factory then, she recalled. It was later that Arthur started his business, and I helped him, supported him as best I could, so it's our joint creation. And Eleanor Miller often said that she had always dreamed of having a daughter. I wanted a daughter so much, but only boys were born. The youngest, your Davy, only appeared because I was hoping for a girl. Last attempt, and here was another boy. And strangely enough, the most loved of all 3. Although at first, of course, I was disappointed. I was sure I was carrying a daughter. Her 2 older sons had given her a total of 4 grandsons. And still, she hadn't had a chance to cuddle a beautiful little girl. I dream of buying my granddaughter dolls, braiding her hair, choosing beautiful dresses, doing everything I wanted to do with a daughter. And here are boys again. Model trains, building sets, cars. No, I adore them, of course, but I want something sweet, girly, pink. Now all my hope is on you. Before this revelation, Sarah hadn't cared what sex the baby would be. But after that, Sarah suddenly realized that she also dreamed of a little girl with turquoise eyes like David's and long, beautiful hair. It really would be wonderful to braid hair, tie bows, dress her in pink dresses. David, on the other hand, dreamed of a son. That's what he said. Sarah increasingly felt that he didn't care about this child at all. He spent a lot of time at work, and in the evenings and on weekends, he ran off to his friends. This was nothing like the beginning of their romance. She hoped that with the birth of the baby, he would settle down. But she was wrong. It only got worse. Alice was born on time. When Sarah held that tiny red creature on her chest, she understood. From this moment on, her life was divided into before and after. Now she was a mother. David and his parents organized a lavish discharge from the hospital for Sarah. Everything was there. An animator in a bear costume, balloons, flowers, happy touch relatives, and a cameraman who captured every moment. Eleanor Miller held the pink bundle with trepid. Finally, her long-held dream had come true. She had a granddaughter, long awaited and loved. David, of course, also seemed happy, even posing with his daughter in his arms with pleasure. But Sarah immediately noticed that he was bored with it all. There was no genuine joy in the young father's eyes. She didn't even see a glimmer of the delight and admiration that she or her mother-in-law felt. Family weekdays flowed by. Sarah was completely immersed in caring for her daughter. Eleanor Miller often visited the young mother and newborn, teaching her daughter-in-law how to care for the baby. Sarah was a mother for the first time. She didn't really know anything. How could she? But the science turned out to be simple, and very soon Sarah felt confident. But Eleanor Miller continued to come, and Sarah didn't object. She saw how much joy her mother-in-law got from her long-awaited granddaughter. It was wonderful that someone else loved the child besides her parents, especially since David wasn't very interested in Alice. His daughter seemed to annoy him. He frowned when the girl cried, especially at night, and complained about sleepless nights. David didn't get up for the child. Sarah always rushed to the little one. It was simply that these nocturnal chores interfered with the head of the family's full sleep. David spent more and more time away from home. The young husband sometimes didn't come home at night. To all of Sarah's questions, David replied that he wasn't her slave and had the right to a break from the family. Gradually, the rose-tinted glasses fell from Sarah's eyes. David showed himself as he was. That's why Eleanor Miller called him a rascal and said he had his head in the clouds. David turned out to be completely unprepared for family life. The worries about the child burdened him. No, at family gatherings, he happily held his charming dressed-up daughter in his arms. Sarah saw that he was simply admiring himself, proud of his new role as a father. But on ordinary days, David avoided contact with the little one. He preferred not to talk to Sarah. It was hurtful and confusing. Eventually, she found out what was going on. For the first time, Sarah accidentally overheard David's conversation. Towards morning, David thought Sarah was sleeping soundly after rocking Alice for 3 hours. The little one wasn't feeling well and was cranky, only agreeing to doze in her arms. But Sarah couldn't fall asleep from exhaustion and, of course, heard everything. Although David tried to speak quietly, he was cooing, there's no other way to put it, with some girl who seemed very young, calling her Bunny and my love, laughing at her remarks, and promising that they would have fun soon. Sarah lay in bed, barely restraining herself from bursting into the kitchen and causing a scene. But it wouldn't lead to anything. David had long become almost a stranger to her. They lived together. Yes, what was important was that he fully provided for her and Alice. And what could she give her daughter if she left? She had to pretend that nothing had happened. Since then, Sarah often noticed signs of his infidelity. Girls called him at home. He barely hid it. No, of course, in his wife's presence, he spoke more discreetly than when Alice, in his opinion, couldn't hear anything. David might come home in the morning, explaining it as an important meeting. At the same time, a bracelet from a nightclub often adorned his wrist, and his clothes reeked of women's perfume. Sometimes he would go on a business trip for 5 to 7 days, returning refreshed, rested, sometimes tanned, clearly under a southern sun. Sarah endured all this feeling humiliated, crushed, lost, broken. She still loved David and until recently believed that he also had feelings. Well, yes, he had cooled off. That happens, especially after a child appears. For some men, it's a test of strength. And David, it turned out he had an affair on the side. Probably even affairs. He addressed his young and, without a doubt, beautiful interlocutors differently. Sometimes Christina, sometimes Megan, sometimes Carolina. Sarah, after putting little Alice to bed, often cried curled up in an armchair near the crib. She understood that her situation was desperate. Living with a husband who cheated left and right was unbearable. David had long looked at her, his lawful wife, as if she were nothing. When was the last time they had a heart-to-heart talk? Sarah couldn't remember. She had to leave him, otherwise she would soon completely lose herself. But what next? Where to go with a small daughter? To a rented apartment again, of course. She would have to go back to work. Alice was very small. She would get sick a lot in kindergarten, like all young children. Who needed such an employee, a young mother constantly on sick leave? It would be hard to find a job during this difficult period. Returning to the village was also not an option. She herself had made every effort to escape from there, and now to live in a tiny house without amenities, and to condemn her daughter to such an existence? No, she had to come up with something else. Her mother-in-law, Eleanor Miller, continued to visit her daughter-in-law and granddaughter frequently. Each time she brought Alice lavish gifts, a designer dress, tiny gold earrings, an expensive doll, an interesting game. It was clear that the elderly woman adored the girl. Sarah, as the mother of this long-awaited princess, also received attention and gifts. The sensitive Eleanor Miller had long noticed that her daughter-in-law looked sad and thoughtful. She asked directly many times, but Sarah always evaded the answers. She said she hadn't slept well with Alice. Her head hurt. Eleanor Miller was a wonderful person. Sarah had no doubt about that then. But how could she tell her about the humiliation she had to endure day after day? But one day, Sarah realized she had to act. It happened on a rainy autumn evening. David came home late, saying he had a business dinner at a restaurant. Sarah pretended to believe him, as always. But then she accidentally saw a photo. David was scrolling through his phone feed, looking at something, smiling happily. She glanced at the screen and froze. There was a photo. In it, David was hugging a beautiful blonde. She was smiling broadly, pressing herself gently against him. It was a selfie. And then, as they say, Sarah lost it. "What is this?" Sarah, unable to restrain herself, burst into a shout. David looked up at her with calm eyes. This photograph, this indifference, this calmness of her husband, who seemed to see nothing unusual in it, finally drove her over the edge. Long suppressed emotions erupted along with sobs and insults. She called him names, screamed hurtful phrases right in his face. She wanted to hurt him as much as possible. Sarah expected David to start making excuses, maybe apologize. But he looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust and remained silent. Losing control, she delivered a resounding slap. She put all her strength into the blow. It was quite impactful. As if in slow motion, Sarah watched as his head snapped back. He had to grab the table to keep from falling. Sarah had achieved her goal. She had jolted him out of his state of cold indifference. David looked at her with such malice that Sarah turned cold with horror. He strode towards her, grabbed her hair tightly. Sarah felt his strong grip. If he wanted to, he could crush her with both hands. It was clear that he was barely restraining himself. With eyes widened in fear, she looked at him, reproaching herself for losing control. "Listen to me carefully," David hissed. "I'm saying this once, I won't repeat it. If this happens again, you'll be out of this apartment like a cork. You'll be just as much of a pauper as you were. You won't see any alimony because most of my salary is unofficial. You'll get pennies. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded silently, trembling violently. She wanted only one thing, for all this to end as soon as possible. But David didn't let go of her hair. On the contrary, he continued to wind it around his fist. "Do you think I don't understand that you deliberately got pregnant by a rich guy? Do you think you're the only one so cunning? I married you not because you're so cunning and shrewd. I'll explain why now. First, you used to be quite attractive. Second, a marriage with someone like you should be easy and not burdensome. People like you should be happy with the conditions you found yourselves in. Raise children, serve your husband, and don't open your mouth unnecessarily. Everyone has their own benefit. Yours is prosperity, wealth, a secure life. Mine is freedom. Is that really so hard to understand? Isn't it obvious? David pushed her away forcefully. Sarah stumbled backward toward the door. His eyes were still blazing with fury. Fortunately, he restrained himself and didn't hit her, but he was clearly close to it. Sarah understood. A similar scene would repeat itself. David would find something to latch on to. He might hit her. He could easily hit her, and he would do it sooner or later. After what happened, life went on as usual. David also disappeared for days and nights, now not hiding, talking to girls right in front of his wife. Sarah was no longer hurt. She was scared. She understood that she couldn't live like this for long. Such an existence was slowly destroying her. But there was no way out. David was right. She had nowhere to go, nothing to live on. In despair, Sarah made the biggest mistake. She turned to Eleanor Miller for help. She thought her mother-in-law was fond of her. She gave gifts, spoke kindly, constantly complimented her. She cooked wonderfully. She was raising her daughter correctly. Sarah didn't expect to hear such words from Eleanor Miller. Well, that's not surprising, she shrugged. Davy, he's been a rascal since he was young. I didn't expect, no. I once hoped he would settle down, grow up. But now I see clearly. He's a perpetual child. But what should I do? Sarah looked at her mother-in-law hopefully. Maybe she would suggest a way out? Well, what now? Live as you are. David will provide for you and your daughter completely, I guarantee that. Well, what can you do? That's the price for a well-fed life. You won't even talk to him? Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't see the point. Eleanor Miller shook her head. You can't change David. I can't live with him. I'll get a divorce. Foolish. Her mother-in-law seemed to worry. And how will you manage alone? Alimony will be pennies. You have nowhere to live. I'll go back to my parents in the village. Better that than endure all this. Alice will grow up. Then I'll think about moving back to the city. You'll take Alice? Now Eleanor Miller was seriously worried. So I won't see her? No, I won't deprive you of her, Sarah assured. You can come visit, or I'll come to you. But I can't live with David anymore. He's cruel, selfish. It's destroying me. So I'll see my granddaughter when you graciously allow it, her mother-in-law clarified. She seemed to have ignored the words about her son. She was only concerned about Alice, her long-awaited beloved granddaughter, the object of her grandmother's pride and adoration. But that's how it turns out. I'm her mother. So it's up to me to decide who my child sees and when. You're mistaken, dear. How good it is that you confided your plans to me. The child will be left with David in a divorce. I'll take care of that. No. Now it was Sarah's turn to be frightened. With us, children are usually left with their mother. That's how it always is. Yes, but that's if the mother is able to support the child. And are you going to deprive your daughter of normal conditions? Take her to a remote village, to a house without amenities? And you don't have a job. But David has a large, well-equipped apartment. And they'll draw up whatever salary is needed in the documents. So you assess the chances yourself. But David doesn't need her, Sarah exclaimed in despair. She hadn't expected such a turn of events at all. Just recently, she had considered her mother-in-law an ally, a helper. Sarah had hoped that after the divorce, Eleanor Miller would help her with Alice both morally and physically, but it turned out that her mother-in-law had simply decided to take her daughter away from her. But I need her, Eleanor Miller said slowly. I've dreamed of a daughter all my life, then a granddaughter. So many plans, so many hopes. And now I have Alice. And now? You want to take her away? No way. Sarah still found the strength to leave her husband then. Alice had just turned 3. It wasn't easy. Sarah was greatly supported by her parents and aunt. With joint efforts, they gathered money so she could rent an apartment in the city, a comfortable, clean, spacious one, so as not to raise questions from the guardianship authorities, to whom Eleanor Miller, of course, had turned. Her relatives paid the rent for 6 months. During this time, Sarah enrolled her daughter in kindergarten and found a job. She had good conditions and a salary sufficient to support the child. Eleanor Miller couldn't take the girl. But the fight for Alice continues to this day. Sarah hoped that one of Eleanor Miller's sons would have a girl and her mother-in-law would shift her attention to her. But David, who married a young woman resembling a fashion model shortly after the divorce, became the father of 2 sons. The wife of one of his brothers also gave birth to a boy. So Alice remained Eleanor Miller's only granddaughter, which is why she didn't give up. Her former mother-in-law constantly wrote complaints to the guardianship authorities. Sometimes she didn't look after the child. Sometimes she was too busy with her personal life. Sometimes she treated the girl cruelly. Sarah and her mother were already used to police and guardianship representatives frequently coming for inspections. Naturally, no violations were found, but Sarah lived in constant fear. You never knew. Eleanor Miller was a rich and influential woman. Sooner or later, she would come up with something, arrange some situation. Sarah couldn't imagine life without Alice anymore. The girl was the center of her universe. Everything Sarah did was for her daughter. David wasn't interested in Alice's affairs, didn't participate in her life at all, transferred meager alimony from his official earnings, and that was it. Alice was quite satisfied with her father's approach. He didn't bother her with communication, and that was fine. Less hassle. It was a pity that Eleanor Miller wasn't so indifferent. Now Sarah was rushing home. Alice was probably already waiting for her mother. Sarah had been delayed. She popped into the shopping center for a minute and ended up spending almost an hour there. So many new interesting things. Good discounts everywhere. Now Sarah was hurrying home, skillfully maneuvering through the passers-by, of whom there were many near the shopping center at this hour. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to an old woman, withered, hunched over in an old coat, her head tied with a gray downy shawl, warm felt boots on her feet. The elderly woman's eyes were an amazing light blue color, as if faded. The old woman looked around, addressed one person, then another, but people didn't hear or see her. Passers-by hurried about their business without slowing down. Sarah couldn't pass by. Drawing level, she stopped. The old woman seemed to understand that she had found a listener. She looked into Sarah's eyes and rustled in a quiet voice, "Daughter, please help. I'm in a desperate situation." Sarah saw that this was true. Judging by her expression, she was close to panic. "What happened?" Sarah asked in a gentle tone. "I came here for meat," the elderly stranger began to explain. "You know, there's a good place in the basement here. Well, anyway, while I was going back and forth, I put my hand in my pocket, and my wallet wasn't there. And only then did it hit me. I left it at home, didn't take it, left it on the nightstand. It's all Jasper, the cat. While I was chasing that rogue from the street, everything flew out of my head. Okay, I had money for a one-way ticket in another pocket, so I got here without problems. But I don't know how to get home now. So you need money for the bus? Sarah clarified. Yes, I do, the old woman said, embarrassed. It's awkward to ask like a beggar. But what can I do? The bus drivers are mean. They won't take you just like that. And I still need to take the inner city bus. I live outside the city in a Dacha village. I tried to go back, asked the driver if he would take me without money, and he lectured me so badly in front of all the passengers that I'm afraid to ask another one. And no one among the passengers helped? Sarah was genuinely surprised. No, the old woman sighed sadly. Well, there weren't many people there, luckily. Otherwise, the driver would have shamed me so much. It's all right. Of course, I'll help. Sarah readily reached into her wallet. Daughter, thank you so much. God bless such a good, caring person. The elderly woman was almost crying with gratitude. Give me your address or phone number, better yet, write it down. My son will transfer the money later. It's not necessary. Sarah smiled. It's not hard for me to help. People also help me in a difficult moment, so thank you, my dear. Sarah nodded and walked on. She was in a hurry. Alice was waiting for her at home. Sarah had a wonderful evening with her daughter. They enjoyed ice cream and pizza, watched movies, cuddling on the sofa. In such moments, Sarah felt happy, protected. What warm and cozy evenings. She waited all week for Friday precisely to relax and unwind in her daughter's company. Sometimes, very rarely, on weekends, Sarah would go out with friends or colleagues to the cinema, a bar, a club. If Eleanor Miller found out about this somehow, a visit from the guardianship authorities would immediately follow. How did her mother-in-law manage to find out about her former daughter-in-law's personal life? Was she spying on her? Her friends thought it was high time Sarah found a man. Young, beautiful, her colleague Joanna persuaded, and always alone. You can't live like that. Alice will grow up, she'll have her own life, and what will you do? Be left alone? Sarah just smiled, shaking her head. After David's betrayal, all men seemed like deceivers to her. She didn't want to date anyone, go on dates again, hope again that she had met the ideal person, and then be bitterly disappointed. No way. And she didn't have time for romances, to be honest. Work, child, household chores, everything was on her fragile shoulders. No, thank you. She wasn't up for it at all. Saturday morning in their small family always started late. Mother and daughter preferred to sleep in after a hard work week and getting up at 6 a.m. But this time, the sleepy silence was broken by a sharp, piercing ring. Sarah barely opened her eyes and looked at the clock. It was only 10. I wonder who decided to bother them so early on a Saturday. Probably the neighbors. She reluctantly got up, put on her robe. A sleepy Alice came out of the nursery. She looked so cute and funny in her silly pajamas with bears. Well, the morning visitor hadn't let the girl lie in bed peacefully. The doorbell rang a second time. "I'm coming!" Sarah shouted, trying not to sound too angry. She looked through the peephole and immediately felt anxious. A man was standing on the landing, tall, young, unfamiliar. It wasn't one of the neighbors, as Sarah had thought at first. "Who is it?" she asked. "My name is Mark." The person behind the door introduced himself. "I have a few questions for you. Are you from the police? Or maybe from guardianship?" Sarah was used to visits from official persons. Usually, they introduced themselves by their full name and added their rank. But here, no, I'm not from the police. I'm the son of the old woman you gave money for a ticket to yesterday. Ah, that's what this is about. The elderly woman had sent her son, after all, to return the money. But how did this man know her address? Sarah hadn't given it to the old woman yesterday. Strange and suspicious. I understand you're afraid to open the door to me. Mark's voice came from behind the door, and rightly so. In our time, one must be vigilant. Let's do this. I'll go out of the building now and wait for you on the porch. Agreed? We'll talk there. All right, Sarah agreed. Indeed, this was the most reasonable option. At the same time, the stranger's morning visit still seemed strange and suspicious. Her primary concern was, how did this person find her? She looked out the window. Mark was indeed standing by the entrance waiting for her. It was a little scary to go out. What if this man was a criminal and an accomplice was waiting on the landing? But there was no one by the door. Sarah went downstairs. Mark met her on the porch. You see, I have a delicate question for you, the man began. Sarah immediately tensed up. Something told her the conversation would be unpleasant. What is it? My mother, she's very elderly. Age, her head isn't quite right. She's not incapacitated, of course. But mother, she's like a child, you understand? Sarah nodded. Of course, she knew that many people became childlike with age. Although yesterday's old woman hadn't given that impression, if her son said so, then it must be true. But what did that have to do with her? Yesterday, mother found herself in a desperate situation, without money, far from home. She was probably in despair and offered you her item in exchange for a ticket. What item? Sarah was genuinely surprised. The old woman hadn't offered any item. The only thing she asked for was a phone number to transfer the money. What do you mean, what item? The man looked at her attentively. Something hostile appeared in his demeanor. She didn't give me anything. Nothing at all. She just asked for money. I gave it. And that was it. And that's it? You're lying. There are witnesses who saw and heard everything. Thanks to them, I found you. My acquaintance works nearby. He saw the whole scene, then noticed which entrance you went into. And finding you there wasn't difficult. He just asked the neighbors which apartment you lived in, describing your appearance from his friend's words. I don't understand anything. Sarah shook her head. What are you accusing me of? Nothing yet. Mother gave you the ornament voluntarily. You didn't extort it. There are witnesses to this. But now, when you're being stubborn, it doesn't look very good. You took advantage of the fact that the old woman wasn't in her right mind and took possession of a valuable item. What valuable item? Sarah exclaimed. Just explain everything clearly. I don't understand anything. And you seem to be a brilliant actress. Mark twisted his lips contemptuously. To be honest, I hope this was a misunderstanding. By the way, it's a brooch, our family heirloom. Not only is it worth a considerable sum in itself, it's also an antique, you understand? It's worth a fortune. And you think I have it? Well, who else? You gave the old woman money for the bus yesterday? Yes? Well, in return, she offered you her brooch. Perhaps you took it because you didn't realize how valuable, how expensive it was. Mark seemed to be giving Sarah one last chance to get out of the situation with dignity. I didn't see any brooch. This is a misunderstanding. Mother said she gave it to the girl who paid for her fare. That's you, which means you have the brooch. No. How can I prove it to you? Just give the ornament back, and that's it. I have a witness. Mother will confirm it in court if necessary. She will confirm that you took the ornament from her. In court? Sarah felt goosebumps crawl up her spine. This man, was he really going to file a lawsuit? This is absurd. But he had a witness. Apparently he really does. Otherwise, how could he have found her so quickly? And what if Sarah can't prove anything in court? What if she's accused of extortion? No one is immune to judicial errors. There are plenty of such cases. Sarah grabbed her head. She can't become a defendant right now, or even a suspect. No way. Eleanor Miller is aware of her every step. She'll surely find out about this story immediately, and of course, use it to her advantage. Problems with the law for the mother? That's a strong argument for the guardianship authorities. They could take Alice away from her. This cannot be allowed. If you've already gotten rid of the brooch, Mark spoke again in a soft, insinuating voice. Well, you never know. You knew they would be looking for it, right? So you sold it as quickly as possible. Then at least return the money. It's worth about... And the man named a figure that made Sarah's head spin. She couldn't collect that amount in several years. And they probably wouldn't give her a loan. The previous one isn't paid off yet. And her salary wouldn't allow it. Unless it's at a high interest rate. How would she live then? On what? The situation seemed hopeless. She couldn't allow a court case because in that case, her mother-in-law would finally get a chance to arrange guardianship over her granddaughter. And there was nowhere to get the money. You're mistaken. Sarah tried to reach Mark one more time. I didn't take that brooch, and I don't have the money. Excellent. Then we'll resolve everything through court. The ornament was insured. If they prove your guilt, which I personally don't doubt, at least we'll get compensation. But you, in that case, will have big problems. Wait, Sarah exclaimed. Give me some time to think. This trouble came so unexpectedly, I don't even know what to do. Just give back the ornament or return the money. Sarah shook her head. She wanted to scream in his face that she hadn't taken anything. But it was probably not worth angering him. Her fate depended on him now. I need time. All right, Mark nodded. But don't think too long. We'll exchange phone numbers now. I'll call the day after tomorrow. I hope you'll find the money. Or decide to give back the brooch. Because otherwise we'll talk differently. And most likely, in court. Mark turned sharply and walked toward the parking lot. Sarah watched him go for a long time. Mom, what happened? Alice looked at her mother, who had returned after the unpleasant conversation, with fear. You're so pale? Who was that man? Oh, just an old acquaintance. Nothing serious. Sarah smiled weakly. Shall we make pancakes? Remember, I promised to teach you? Of course. Alice and Sarah spent about an hour in the kitchen. The girl chattered happily about her friends and teachers. Sarah nodded, smiled, was surprised, praised her. But her thoughts were far away. She was thinking about how to get out of this strange situation. Mark won't give up. That's obvious. He's got it into his head that Sarah took the expensive brooch, and nothing will convince him otherwise. That old woman? Why did she say that about her? Maybe the grandmother really isn't in her right mind and doesn't know what she's saying? Or did the elderly woman, having lost the brooch, make up a story for her son so he wouldn't be angry? Judging by how Mark behaved, he knows how to be tough, even cruel, a cold gaze, abrupt movements. Anyway, Sarah has to decide something now. She absolutely cannot become a suspect right now. It's unknown whether she'll be able to prove her innocence. There's only one option left. Find the money. But where? There's no one to help. Her parents themselves live in poverty. Her salary is quite good, of course. But the sudden death wouldn't be covered even in several years. And she probably wouldn't get a loan. There was one way out. Turn to David. The main thing is that he doesn't blab to his mother. She'll quickly figure out how to turn the situation to her advantage. She's been dreaming of taking Alice for a long time. And David? He doesn't need his daughter, that's for sure. He won't fight for her. She'll have to swallow her pride and resentment and call her ex-husband. How hard, how unbearably hard. But what else can she do? David never participated in his daughter's life, except for the meager alimony that landed in Alice's account every month. Maybe he can help just once? For him, the amount Mark is demanding isn't that big. Sarah sent her daughter to watch cartoons and dialed a number she hadn't used in many years. David answered immediately. Hi, we need to talk. Is something wrong with Alice? David asked in an indifferent tone. No, but it concerns her too. Something has happened to me. They met that evening in a cafe. David used to invite her here for dates. Years ago, they sold wonderful strawberry eclairs here. However, they weren't on the menu anymore. So what's happened to you? David made it clear he had little time. 5 years had passed since their divorce. David had barely changed. He still looked like a carefree guy from a youth series, a stylish regular at nightclubs. Perhaps Eleanor Miller was right. David was a perpetual boy. Sarah briefly told David what had happened. A mocking look appeared in David's eyes. Yes, something like that could only happen to you. He's a typical scammer. Threaten him with a police report. He's going to file a report against me, Sarah sighed. And I can't afford to be involved with the police. You know why? Your mother. She's just waiting for the right moment to take Alice. Mother. David sighed sadly. That's true. She's getting on my nerves too. Always nagging me to sue for my daughter. Why would I need that? And a child is always better off with her mother. Sarah nodded, then asked again, but will you help me? Will you lend me the money? Without interest? I'll pay it back little by little from each paycheck. No, David replied. I'm not going to sponsor criminals. He'll demand even more later. That's the kind of people they are. You can't feed him. Sarah sighed. She already understood that she wouldn't get help from David. Turning to him was a mistake. When he calls, tell him you've already filed a report against him at the station, her ex-husband advised finally. Then he paid the bill and walked out of the cafe with long strides. And Sarah was left alone with her problem again. Yes, she understood that Mark might be a scammer. But what if he wasn't? She couldn't risk it because Eleanor Miller, she wasn't sleeping. Just recently, her mother-in-law had reported to guardianship that her daughter-in-law went out at night and didn't take care of her child. And it was all because Sarah had gone to a friend's birthday party. Alice had stayed home alone during that time, brushed her teeth, made her bed, and gone to sleep herself. Sarah returned when her daughter was already asleep. How did Eleanor Miller find out about everything? It was very simple. She saw a photo on one of her friend's pages that included Sarah, compared the dates and times, and used this picture as evidence. Sarah was advised then to hire a nanny for such cases and was sympathized with. Living under such close scrutiny from her former mother-in-law was difficult. Eleanor Miller frightened Sarah more and more with her persistence, her desire to take her granddaughter. If she found out about the court case now, she would use all her connections to fulfill her long-held dream. No, Sarah wouldn't give her that chance. What should she do? Sarah decided to walk home. The way wasn't too short, but the weather was wonderful. Spring, the sun was shining, birds were singing, the sky was clear and blue, not a cloud in sight. The snow was melting literally before her eyes, and thawed patches appeared on the asphalt. Before, Sarah always felt a surge of spirits at such moments. Nature was waking up. Her favorite time of year, summer, was just around the corner. But today, her heart was heavy. An unbearable problem had suddenly fallen upon her. How to solve it? Look for money? Or try to prove to Mark that she had nothing to do with it? Both options didn't seem particularly viable. Sarah wandered past the very shopping center near which she had met the old woman. To think they had to run into each other that evening. If Sarah had gone home later or earlier, none of this would have happened. She would be living peacefully, enjoying the spring, the sun, the upcoming vacation. And suddenly, she stopped as if struck by lightning. She even blinked several times to make sure she wasn't imagining things. The very same old woman was walking across the parking lot. The coat, the downy shawl, and the eyes of an incredible light blue shade. Next to the grandmother, carefully supporting her elbow so she wouldn't slip on the melting snow, strode a young man. And it wasn't Mark. Short, fair-haired, with a pleasant, open face and eyes exactly like the old woman's. He was smiling, telling the elderly woman something, and she listened attentively, occasionally interjecting remarks. The pair was walking away. They would probably get into a car and leave soon. No, she couldn't let that happen. Fate itself had given her a unique chance to get out of a difficult situation. Now she would talk to the old woman, and perhaps everything would become clear. Sarah hurried after them across the parking lot. Maybe they're in league with that man. She's in for another unpleasant conversation now. But it's worth trying, isn't it? Wait! Sarah shouted to the old woman and the man as they were almost disappearing around the corner. The elderly woman was the first to turn around. For a moment, she scrutinized Sarah, squinting nearsightedly. A smile lit up the old woman's face. Apparently, she recognized the passerby who had given her money for her fare a couple of days ago. The man was seeing Sarah for the first time, so he looked questioningly at the stranger rushing towards them at full speed. "Hello," Sarah breathed out, catching up. "Good day," the man greeted her. "Hello, daughter." The grandmother smiled warmly. "I recognize you. You were the one who helped me then. Thank you very much." The man, understanding what was going on, also smiled. "So you were the one who didn't pass by my mother that day? She told me how desperate she was, and people just hurried past, not paying attention to her. Only you responded." "So you're also her son?" Sarah clarified. "What do you mean, also?" The grandmother was surprised. "Tom is my only son, late and long awaited. Before him, I only had daughters. I have 4 daughters, all much older than my son. The older ones are already grandmothers themselves." "But what about Mark?" Sarah stared wide-eyed at the mother and son. "What Mark?" The old woman frowned. "I don't think I know anyone by that name." "Did something happen to you?" Tom finally guessed. "And is it somehow connected to that time you met my mother? Is that right?" Sarah nodded silently. She didn't understand anything yet. One thing was clear. Mark was a scammer, that was now absolutely certain, but many questions remained. The main one: how to act now. Mark is a scammer. Sarah fell into his sights. You never know how he'll behave. What if he starts threatening her, or does something to her, or God forbid to Alice? How terrifying. Tell us what happened, Tom asked gently. Well, it's not your problem. Why should you have extra worries? Please, leave me your phone number. It might be needed soon. Tell us. Tom gently patted her shoulder. This friendly gesture, it changed a lot. She suddenly realized she wanted to share her story with this person. Very much so. First, I should introduce myself, I guess, she sighed. My name is Sarah. That evening, I was coming home from work, came out of the shopping center, and saw an elderly woman. She was asking people something. Everyone was rushing about their business. And Sarah told them everything. How she had given the old woman money for her fare, about the morning call, the conversation with Mark. She mentioned her doubts and anxieties. She had to share details of her personal life with her listeners. How else would they understand why she hadn't immediately gone to the police? Tom listened without interrupting. His mother periodically shook her head, clicked her tongue, and sighed, sometimes interjecting angry, condemning remarks. She went on about Mark, then about Eleanor Miller, her former mother-in-law, got it? And David, who hadn't helped the mother of his child in a difficult moment. What a brute. The old woman shook her head. He understood that Mark was a scammer. He should have met with him. Talk like a man. Yes, girl, you have a hard life. All by yourself. After listening to Sarah, Tom thought about her story in silence for a while. His mother, meanwhile, showered her with words of support. It was clear that she sincerely wanted to cheer Sarah up, to instill confidence that everything would be all right. This care even brought tears to Sarah's eyes, but she quickly blinked them back. It wasn't time to relax. We'll expose this, Mark, Tom finally declared. And he said it so convincingly that Sarah felt, with every cell of her body, she was no longer alone. She had protection. This is strange, unexpected. Tom and his mother are complete strangers. Sarah had no doubt. Tom knew what to do in this situation. I have a good friend who works in the investigative committee. I started there myself, then went into business. I needed money urgently. My father was very ill. I'll call my friend right now, and I'll keep you updated on what's happening. You'll have to come in and give a statement. When exactly? I don't know yet, but definitely soon. Sarah nodded. Yes, now it wasn't scary to turn to representatives of the law. Thank you, Sarah said. Thank you for your caring. Why wouldn't we help a good person? The man smiled. This smile warmed Sarah's heart. You didn't pass by my mother either when she needed help, and you got into this terrible situation only because of us. On the way home, Sarah replayed the details of that conversation in her mind again and again. Imagine, is this really true? Sarah was seriously afraid that her meeting with Tom was just a hallucination. What if her brain, desperately searching for a way out, simply made up this scene? No, of course, that can't be. And yet, there were doubts. Tom called a couple of hours later. Sarah hadn't expected such efficiency. At first, she flinched at the sharp ring of her cell phone. Her heart seized with fear. What if it's Mark again? He'll start threatening, accusing, frightening her again. But Tom's cheerful voice came through the receiver. Can you be at Krasnoznameni Street in 40 minutes? They're waiting for you in office 307. They're already aware. Of course. Well, then everything happened with dizzying speed. Tom was already waiting for Sarah on the steps of the tall building with massive columns. Seeing him, she felt relief. He was there, which meant everything would be all right. Tom escorted her to the investigator's office. He asked questions about Mark. Sarah described in detail the appearance and behavior of the man who had introduced himself as the son of the supposedly deceived old woman. If he calls, stall for time, the investigator said finally. We've put this guy under surveillance. We'll start gathering evidence, but we need at least a couple of days. Tell him you're arranging loans or something like that. Your phone is tapped, by the way. You're aware you signed the consent yourself, so we'll hear everything he says to you. Sarah nodded silently. Tom offered to give her a ride home. She gladly accepted. Not because she didn't want to walk to the bus stop. No. It was just, it's so great to spend some more time with this person. Sarah was surprised at herself. She had only known Tom for a short time, but next to him, she felt such calmness, such peace, that she didn't want to part with him at all. What is this? The beginning of feelings? Or is it just gratitude towards someone who wasn't indifferent to her trouble? What does it matter? The main thing is, they'll see each other again. The case isn't closed yet. Tom promised he will see it through to the end. So it will be. That evening, Mark called again. On the investigator's advice, Sarah asked for a delay. You still won't believe that I didn't take any brooch, will you? Sarah asked this question so that Mark would confirm his claims out loud. There was no brooch. But the man stubbornly insisted that Sarah had deceived the elderly person and tricked the valuable item out of the old woman. Aren't you tired of pretending? Mark hissed. You have the brooch. You took it from my mother, taking advantage of her helpless state. And now you're denying it? I'm calling the police? No, Sarah feigned fear. I can't afford to be under suspicion right now. The situation is such that it's easier to pay the money. I've already started arranging a loan, but the procedure isn't quick. You'll have to wait. How long? About 2 days. All right, I'll call again. Mark hung up. Sarah exhaled with relief. She had done it. She had managed to buy a couple of days, as the investigator had asked. The rest of the evening passed as usual. Sarah helped her daughter with a project. They made dinner together and played Monopoly for a bit. Sarah tried not to think about Tom, but she couldn't help herself, remembering his light blue eyes and white smile again and again. She checked herself. Most likely Tom isn't available. Maybe he has a wife and children. She's already dreaming here. If so, his other half is lucky. Being with such a person is immense happiness. The next day flew by unremarkable. But then, during her lunch break, Sarah's cell phone chirped cheerfully. The name on the screen was Tom. Sarah's heart gave a sweet flutter. At the same time, a chill appeared in her stomach. You never knew what news he was calling with? The man suggested meeting at a cafe near the building where Sarah worked. Just in case, she warned her boss about a possible late return from lunch and hurried to the cafe. Tom was already waiting for her at a table. He looked calm and happy. From his expression, Sarah immediately knew everything was all right. Sarah couldn't help but admire Tom. High cheekbones, confidence, a calm gaze. Good day. Tom stood up and pulled out a chair for Sarah. Pure gallantry. I have some news. Good news. More than good. I'll start with the main thing. Mark has been arrested. It turns out he has many victims simultaneously, about 5 just now. And those are only the ones we've been able to identify. 5? Sarah, strangely enough, was even a little pleased by this information. So she wasn't the only naive one who fell for Mark's hook. 5, Tom confirmed. And then he told her details about the man who had demanded the expensive antique brooch from Sarah. It turned out he had grown up in an orphanage. He didn't want to work in the profession he had learned there. A plasterer and painter has to work hard, and Mark didn't like that. He liked a beautiful life and easy money. At first, he was a pickpocket, got caught a couple of times, and in both cases, he was lucky. The victims were moved by the orphan's pitiful story and withdrew their complaints. Mark realized that working in that role was risky and started acting more subtly. He figured out that there were many trusting and simply foolish people in the world, and he could make money from them without much effort. Mark started scamming people over the phone. Many, without going into details, transferred quite decent sums to cards. Mark was sometimes surprised by the amounts of the transfers, but over time, it became harder to work, too risky, difficult not to leave a trace. Mark was invited to work for companies professionally, engaged in such calls, where the risk of being caught was minimal. But Mark dreamed of a solo career. He had no shortage of imagination or attentiveness. He liked to come up with new schemes, invent incredible stories. This was probably how his creative side manifested itself. With Sarah, it turned out interestingly. He accidentally saw her in court once. It was another time she had ended up there because of her former mother-in-law. Sarah had easily proven then that she was perfectly capable of raising her daughter independently. But Mark immediately saw Sarah clearly wouldn't want to become the heroine of a detective story, to fall under the police's radar. And that meant she was an excellent potential victim. She wouldn't just not report Mark. You could even scare her with the police. Here Mark hit the nail on the head. He knew how to draw conclusions. So Sarah became a potential victim. Now Mark occasionally followed her, waiting for a convenient moment. The opportunity didn't present itself. Sarah's life was measured, monotonous, in Mark's opinion, even boring. He wasn't worried. He always had work. People fell into his nets easily, and it was always a completely unique story. Mark was particularly proud of some of his feats. Once he managed to get an old woman from a neighboring house to sign over her apartment to him. Mark convinced the elderly woman that he was the child of her deceased son. It turned out to be easy. The elderly lady herself wanted to believe in the suddenly appeared grandson. The old woman was lonely, unsociable. Her only relative was a brother who expected to get the living space after his sister's death. But it didn't happen. The apartment became Mark's property. Everything was revealed only after this grandmother passed away. Such big fish no longer fell into his net, but Mark wasn't worried about it. Greed wasn't good, even dangerous. And then suddenly, completely by chance, Mark noticed Sarah helping an unfamiliar old woman, and a plan immediately formed in his head. The story came together on its own. Only one thing he didn't take into account. Tom smiled. You accidentally ran into that very old woman at the shopping center. The probability was minimal. Mother lives far from here, Mark, of course. had found that out before acting. That's how circumstances aligned. I can't even believe it, Sarah said slowly. And what will happen to him now? He'll go where he belongs. He'll sit and think about his behavior. The investigator pulled on the threads, and so many more victims were found. Many have already given statements. Some are just about to. In short, bunks await the romantic and the creative. Sarah still couldn't believe that the problem that had poisoned her life for these few days no longer existed. The man took a deep breath and said, "And I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of being a savior, all that. But if I invite you to the cinema tonight, what would you say?" Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. What would she say? Yes. She had to try her best to keep herself from shouting with joy. Apparently, her emotions were clearly visible on her face because Tom understood everything and smiled